What's your context?
Context is going to be like local campus ministry is doing like revival, kind of like evangelism night, and they've invited some like pastors, local pastors, and people to preach at it.
Okay.
So I know it's not like 100% non-Christians, but the goal is like I'm not going to talk to the Christians in the room, and I'm
Okay.
assuming that it's mostly non-Christians.
All right. Cool.
Yeah, John 3:22-36. Right. Well, good evening. Thank you for having me here. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you guys. We are gonna be reading from the Bible today. Spending some time in that. I've got it printed out for you right there in front of you. So you don't need a Bible if you don't have one. Don't worry. We're going to be in the New Testament, the second half of the Bible, in a book called John, specifically John chapter 3, verses 22-36. Those little numbers right there are going to be the verse numbers, so you can follow along. I'll be referring to that. It'll be helpful to keep that page in front of you so that you can follow along. I'm going to read it for us, and then I want to talk to you for just a few minutes out of that passage. After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing. John also was baptizing at Aenon near Salim, because water was plentiful there, and people were coming and being baptized, for John had not yet been put in prison. Now discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. They came to John and said to him, "Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him." John answered, "A person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. He who comes from above is above all. He who is of the earth belongs to the earth and speaks in an earthly way. He who comes from heaven is above all. He bears witness to what he has seen and heard, yet no one receives his testimony. Whoever receives his testimony sets his seal to this, that God is true. For he whom God has sent utters the words of God, for he gives the Spirit without measure. The Father loves the Son and has given all things into his hand. Whoever believes in the Son has eternal life. Whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on him." I said thank you for allowing me to speak to you all. It is a joy to be here. I will say this has been a great week. I was sick earlier this week, not super fun, but I did what I think we kind of all do when we're sick. I watched a lot of TV. I don't know why, something that like we know that's bad for us when we're healthy, all of a sudden once we're sick, it's like time to go. But there I was, watching a couple hours of TV, and I kind of figured it out. I figured out how to make a great TV show. So if you guys are taking notes, I would take notes on this, how you can make your next hit TV show. It really all centers around one question. All you need to know to make a good TV show is this: how could things ever be made right? That's the only question you need. You just need to ask that question and answer it over and over again. How could things ever be made right? Really, it's the secret to any good story, right? Take our characters, we get invested, and then we put them in danger, and we think, how could things ever be made right? Maybe we get some characters together, and then we break them up. How could things ever be made right? It's what makes for a good TV show. It makes for a fun and engaging show, or any sort of story, really. I will say, it is a lot less fun when it comes to our actual world. It's great in TV. It's fun, engaging, makes for an interesting story. It is a far less fun question when we're asking about our world. When you look at the world that we live in and think, man, how could things ever be made right? I don't know if you've asked that question. I certainly have over the past couple of years, over the past couple of days. How could things be made right politically or socially, economically, maybe even in your own life? Forget about the world at large. how could things be made right in my life? Relationally, emotionally. Maybe you have done things that you can't take back that you wish you could. Maybe there are relationships that have broken down that you wish could be fixed. Just asking yourself, how could things ever be made right? It's a lot less fun when it comes to our world, but it's an important question. Because, don't we all want things to be made right? Don't we all wish that we lived in a world that was whole, that was good? Wonder if you've ever thought about that question when it comes to God. You might not believe in God. That is totally fine. If you don't believe in God and you're here, I'm super glad you're here. So let's just imagine that if God was real, I wonder, do you feel like you'd be right with him? What would it take for you to be right with God if he was real? I think it's an important question. I hope to convince you that it is not only an important question, but that the passage that we just read contains the answer to all of these questions. How could things ever be made right in our world, in our lives, maybe even with God? I will say, I know I'm saying the answers to those questions. I do realize that it begins in a super weird space. If you remember when we read it, our passage kind of begins in an unfamiliar space. But just to make it a little more simple for you, I think it really begins with the question of wholeness. Question of wholeness. It begins there in verse 22 with Jesus and his disciples going out into the countryside to baptize. And then there's also this other guy, John, who's out there baptizing. And right away, I got a couple of questions. First off, who are these people? Who are the characters in this story? Well, like I said, we are in John chapter 3, so we're still in the beginning of this whole book, the beginning of this whole story, but I think I can answer those questions. John is a local preacher in his day, basically. He's out there in the wilderness, and he's got this whole ministry that's basically about making things right. His whole ministry is for people who recognize that something's wrong with their lives and want to make a change, want to make things right. Jesus is a little new on the scene, and we are pretty early in this book, but John, who's writing the book, who's different than the guy in the story, we'll call John who's writing John the author, and John in the story, John the Baptist, just to keep it less confusing. John the author, it seems his whole goal is to tell us about this Jesus guy. So we don't know too much so far. He's kind of a crazy dude. He's done some pretty crazy things, said some pretty crazy things. But here we're going to get a little bit more of an idea of who this Jesus guy is. If those are our characters, then what the heck are they doing? They're going out into the wilderness and they're baptizing. Well, what's up with that? Baptizing actually was a thing way before Christians were around. It pretty much, to make it simple for everyone, it's a symbol of making things right. A symbol of wholeness, of purification, of cleanliness. It's a symbol. John was using it as a symbol of people who wanted to make things right, of being made whole. Right? There's really two types of people at this point in John's day. There's people who are still at home, who thought, to be honest, my life's all right. I'm doing okay. Things are not that bad. And then there were people who were going out to this John the Baptist guy, going out to this Jesus guy because they felt like something's wrong. Something's wrong with the world that we live in. Something's wrong with my life. I need to make a change. I need to make things right somehow. Maybe these guys have the answer. I wonder if you're here today and you feel that need. If you're here today and you feel like something is wrong with this world. Maybe even something is wrong with my life. I wonder when you feel that, if you feel that, what do you look to? What do you look to make things better? To make things right? Can you be sure that it actually can? I'll tell you something about myself that you could probably guess. As a single guy, my measure of cleanliness is a little bit below par, I would say. I don't know, you kind of get used to how you feel about things, and I would say my apartment is not the most clean. You just kind of get used to the shoes lying around and the dishes, getting done slowly. It's something I learned about myself when I moved out of college. It doesn't, it's a little bit helpful to have a roommate, but the roommate is just another single guy, and so it doesn't fix a lot. We're both just kind of sitting in our filth. But I will say, when I notice this, when I realize that things are not up to par, that they're not that clean, is when my mom comes to town, right? When my mom comes to town, all of a sudden I start to see things through her eyes and realize it's not exactly up to par. Things are not as clean as I think they are. They're not as great as I think they are. I start to notice those shoes on the floor and the laundry that's not done and the dishes that have been sitting on the counter for a couple weeks. Start to realize my house is a little more messy than I thought. Friend, I wonder if you woke up one day and looked at your life and realized things aren't as good as I thought. I'm not as all right as I thought. If you woke up one day and realized that thing that you're looking to make things all right, that it's fallen short. It's not making everything better. I don't know what it is for you. A new relationship, or that degree that you're going to get, or maybe the job after the degree that you can get, the place that you'll move. And I wonder if you woke up one day and realized that things aren't all right. What would be a good thing to do in that situation? Wouldn't it be to run to the person who could make things all right and see if they could help? See if they would help. Kind of like I do when my mom comes and say, "Mom, please help me clean this up." Well, if that first section is a question of wholeness, of how can things be made all right, leads right into the next section, a question of authority. Who can make things all right? Who can make everything better? It's exactly the question that it seems that these disciples, these followers of John the Baptist have. Right there in verse 25, some sort of discussion starts going. There's some sort of argument. We don't know exactly what it is. It's about this question of how can things be made all right? How can things be made better? We don't know exactly what it is, but I think we get the gist. Because they roll up to John the Baptist, and they have this question disguised as a statement. Right? It's kind of like when you look at your roommate and you're like, "Hey, the trash is full." You're saying a statement, but really you're asking a question of when are you going to clean this up? Right? They roll up to John the Baptist and they're like, "So, teacher, John, my guy, you know that dude Jesus who you talked about, he's actually over there baptizing." Really, the question that they're asking is, who's got authority? Who can make things better? Who can make things all right? He's baptizing, you're baptizing. Who's really counts? I wonder how you would respond to that. I wonder how people today respond to this kind of accusation. These kind of challenges to authority. If you've ever listened to any sort of politician or celebrity, but not well, I would say. I think what we expect here from John the Baptist is a lot of defense. Some sort of clapback. He comes out and starts securing his followers, his ministry, trying to get more likes on his post or get more people to donate to his cause. It's fascinating to see what John actually says. He starts out something pretty simple. Some things he kind of thinks, hey, me, you, we can all agree on this. A person can't receive even one thing unless it's given from heaven. He says, look, if I got anything, it's from God. So let's just be clear on that. Second of all, I never claimed to be the guy. That's what he says. What he means when he says, I'm not the Christ. See, this whole question of who can make things right in their culture was all wrapped up in this figure of the Christ or the Messiah. Before Jesus showed up, Christ meant something else. Christ is not just Jesus' last name. It's actually a title. Essentially, it's the guy who God promised is going to come and make everything all right. The guy who God promised is going to come and fix everything. And John's saying, like, anything I got from God, and I'm not that guy, never said I was that guy. I've never said that I'm the guy who's going to make everything okay. Man, it's shocking in a world like ours. A response like that, it's not what I expect. But then he goes even further than that. He says, man, the guy's right over there. I'm just a friend. I'm just here for the party. The bridegroom has actually shown up. He kind of transports us into this image of the wedding. Think about a groom and his bride. This image of things made right, of restoration, of relationship, of joy and happiness. He's like, I'm not the groom. I'm not the center of attention. I'm just the friend who's hyping him up. I'm just pointing you out. That guy's the groom right there. I'm just happy to be here. In fact, I'm kind of off the scene at this point. He must increase, but I must decrease. It's not my ministry, not my party. I'm just here to point the way. How can things be made right in a world like ours, in lives like ours? I think here we learn how they can't be made right. They can't be made right by that next politician or the next celebrity who claims that they can fix everything, who claims that they're the guy, they're the girl, they've got us. The next psychologist or self-help guide isn't going to make things better. We need someone like John. Someone who can step out the way and say, actually, it's not me. Yeah, you can just take my word for that. We can look at the world we live in. I'd ask, how well are the politicians doing? How well are the celebrities doing at making everything better? How well is that new diet going, or that new self-help plan? It doesn't seem like we're doing a great job. We can't make things better. So again, I'd ask, who can? If John doesn't have the authority, I don't have the authority to make things better. But we need so desperately for things to be made better. How is that going to happen? Well, if we've had a question of holiness and a question of authority, finally, we get answers to it all in this third section right here. Again, it starts out from a pretty simple place, a place that I think we can all get on board with, even if you don't believe in God, even if you don't believe in this heaven stuff that he's talking about. I mean, it just kind of makes sense, right? It says there in 31 that he who is of the earth belongs to the earth. He speaks in an earthly way. He who comes from heaven, he's above all. He bears witness to heavenly things. Just kind of makes sense, right? We talk about what we know. If you're just from earth, you can only explain stuff from earth. But if there was someone who was from heaven, if there was someone from God, man, they could answer that question that we need. The question of how could things get better. John's saying, man, he's right there. Your guy is standing right there. It's a crazy moment talking to the Jews back then. You just think about it for a second. I mean, these are people who have been waiting for years for this Messiah, this Christ figure that God has promised is going to make everything better. And John's like, it's him. He is right there. But y'all aren't listening. Right? Verse 32, he bears witness to what he has seen and heard, yet no one receives his testimony. It's like, oh, you fools. Man, he's right in front of you, you're not listening. This is the guy you've been waiting for, and you're not listening. What a silly thing to not hear him out. The guy that you've been waiting for, the guy that you've been hoping for, the guy that will make everything better. How foolish it would be not to listen to what he had to say. Not to listen to the words that he had brought. I wonder if you're willing to give him a listen. If you are willing to hear what he has to say. You might not believe any of this is real. That's all right. But man, if someone did come from heaven, if God himself came down and said, I'm here to tell you how all things will be made right, wouldn't you want to listen? Wouldn't you want to hear him out? Turns out that not only would this be good news, but it would be great news, because this is exactly what we need. Remember, we're not doing such a great job at fixing things. But it turns out that even the bad stuff that you and I can see here on this earth, even the problems that we've got, are not as bad as it really is. It's actually a lot worse than we think. I think we're kind of like that single guy living in an apartment who's like, it's pretty clean in here. And mom shows up and it's not that great. See, the Bible talks about the earth that we live in actually is something that's good. It wasn't always this messed up. God created it and it was good, and people were good, and life on it was full of joy. God said, hey, I'm God, you're people, you live in this earth and you enjoy it. It's a good thing. So we decided, actually, I'd rather be God. I'd rather run the show. Which feels good until you run into someone else who's also trying to be God. And we end up lying and hurting each other, cheating and stealing and breaking the world that God made. The Bible's explanation for all the chaos and garbage that you see out here is that you and me and everyone else on this earth is pretending to be God. Trying to fill that role. A bunch of little G gods running around. Now, in our passage, so that God showed up. God showed up with some words. And you'd expect, if you just think about it like that something is about to go down. That God is about to destroy some people. If capital G God shows up and we're sitting on his throne, oh man, you would expect that it is going to be bad. But this whole Jesus thing, this whole God coming to earth thing didn't go as we'd expect. Instead of showing up and destroying everyone who was claiming to be God, instead of showing up and wiping us out, God showed up, Jesus Christ, and said, I'm here to make all things better. I'm here to make it new. I'm here to fix these problems. Jesus is everything that we need. In fact, way better than we could expect. God come to make things right. God, the only one with the authority to actually make things right. The only one who knows how to make things right. The one that we need who can make things right. It is mind-boggling news. I realize there's some crazy things that Christians believe. Like God coming to earth. I recognize that. That God would actually want to make things right. How can we be sure of any of this? Why would you believe that anything I have to say, anything the Bible has to say? It's right there, verse 36. The person of Jesus is the very Son of God. He's the one who God loves, the one who has come with authority to fix things, the one who says, I've come to make things right. He's God's very Son. Why would not God give him everything that he asked for? Why would God not allow him to make all things right? Man, this is the beauty of Christianity. That God's Son himself came down so that we might have life. How can things ever be made right? In a world as broken as ours, how can things ever be put back together, made whole? You need someone who has the authority, the ability to accomplish that. It's what the Bible says we have in Jesus Christ. Friend, I hope that you will consider Jesus. I pray that you will believe in Jesus, because in Jesus is life. are, I am a little God sitting on God's throne. We have a decision to make at this point. Either get off that throne and enjoy the life that is offered to us, and enjoy the good news that Christ has come proclaiming life, proclaiming all things made right, or remain on that throne. Remain on that throne until God comes back. And as it says in verse 36, experience the wrath of God for pretending to be God in his place. How can things ever be made right? How would John the Baptist answer that question in our text today if he was here? What did he say? Friends, he's come. The guy who can make all things right has come. Put your faith in him. Put your trust in him. Believe in him. Don't face the wrath of God. Know the life that God has offered to all people. Thank you.
All right. Christian, how are you encouraged?
I think just like this idea of, it starts out in this place of like, man, people are trying to right everything that's wrong and try and like seek this place of wholeness, and then it moves to like, man, Jesus is that guy. He's come to make things better, to restore relationship and right the wrongs, and yeah, I think that's encouraging.
Josh?
I think that just that consistent question that you keep asking, how can things be made right? But then you answered it with the gospel, with Jesus Christ, and
Hopefully,
it's just a promising thought there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Man, I just love how, like, I think I'm just really encouraged by how John is just like, it's just such a model of like, man, he's come,
yeah,
I'm done, like,
yeah,
it's just like so encouraging to see someone like not fight for power,
yeah,
like so like happily give up his like prominence and stuff.
yeah,
And just like that whole thing of just like, he must increase but I must decrease, and it's like, it's just so refreshing. Like, so refreshing to see that kind of leadership and someone who he's willing to do that for.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's good.
Yeah, I think what was most encouraging to me was, like, whoever this Jesus guy is, he's pretty great. And that it's not just something you think, but it's something that this text says, and that another character in the text says. And there's good reason to think that Jesus is better than John and anybody else. What's one place where you're like, yeah, I probably didn't make it on that?
Just the conclusion. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Why is it? Was it that you didn't write it down, or is it that you just bombed?
Some of it's just bombing. Some of it's like, I realized what I wrote down just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And some of it is, I think consistently, and this is like a problem, I think that the hardest things for me are the like Christian-y things, and like how can I communicate like Christian doctrine that's not just like in the text but is important, like quickly and clearly, and yeah. So I think whenever I come to something like that, like, ooh, I need to explain this, and I thought it was going to be easier than it actually is, then I just like really get wonky. So I think that, yeah.
All right. Josh.
I think getting into your third point, what transition was a little rocky to me. Just I guess it was about the answer to it all, right? I mean, was that kind of what you were going for that third point? Because it doesn't really match the first two ways of phrasing it.
Right.
The question of authority,
Right.
the question of wholeness.
Yeah.
Which I guess that's fine. We need the answer to that question.
Right.
It's just maybe explaining it better, and then like you said, the kind of the conclusion, the last part. I don't know. The way the text concludes is the wrath of God. So what's the wrath of God? Like, explain it a little more. What does that mean? That the wrath of God is on me? Yeah.
Were you preaching from a manuscript?
No.
Okay. Well, if you were, I'd say go back and do Control F and type in thing. Because you use the word thing
Oh, bro.
so many times. Like, and used it in a lot of different ways. And you said, but the most common way that you used it is that things aren't right, and is going to make Christ the guy who God promises to come and to make things right. And I'm just like, I don't know what's wrong. I don't know what things are wrong, but things are being made right. Like, I definitely get that sense. Like, things are wrong, things are gonna be made right, but like, what are these things? And so, I think you needed to define what was wrong. Like, what are the things that was wrong? And you kept just saying that, like, of like this whole thing of like, baptism is a symbol of making things right or whole, and it's just like, you're just assuming that we all already agree that, you know, things are wrong.
Yeah.
And so.
Or that we know what the heck baptism is.
That's
Yeah.
true.
You told us all about the symbolism. I didn't know it was getting wet. That was funny. Okay, here's my biggest criticism. You made this way more confusing than it needed to be. Here's, like, as far as the way through the text.
Yeah.
Like, the first point was kind of confusing, where it was like, these are just dueling baptisms, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Because it seemed like the way through the text was, all you really need to say in the first part was like, there's two baptisms going on.
Yeah.
Here's why baptism is significant.
Yeah.
Now, it's going to focus on the discourse of John. And there's just two parts to John's message. I'm not the guy. This is the guy. What you said in that sermon, I was like, that's how you get it.
Yeah.
That's what's clear. Because you said, like, oh, this is a really good thing you said. Here we learn how they can't be made right. That would have been great to say at the beginning. John's not the guy because John can't make him right. That's the essence of this speech. Look what he says, and then say it again at the end.
Yeah.
But because you waited till the end, by the time you said it at the end, I was like, oh, well, now it makes sense what he's saying.
Yeah.
Well, what'd you have to say all that stuff for? So it was like the homiletical points didn't do you any favors. And it was like, man, I saw what you were trying to do,
Yeah.
but it just there's lots of other words in there.
So you would like you basically just wouldn't even have that first little point. You just kind of like survey real quick. This is what's happening, and then
Yeah, it's just like, here's a setting for a
Yeah.
speech.
Yeah.
Right? So you got a setting and a speech in two parts.
Yeah.
And setting is baptism. Well, why is this a thing?
Mhm.
Right? Why are they doing baptism to begin with?
Yeah.
And then the whole debate is going to be about who's the person.
Yeah.
That would, and which seems to be like the way you saw it.
Yep.
But homiletically, you just made it weird. Josh?
At the beginning, you just said one thing that didn't jive with me. You just said, it's totally fine if you don't believe in God. That's just completely the opposite of your sermon.
I mean,
Just didn't.
You know?
you said something.
It's just a thing people do. One of those things.
Yeah.
Ah!
I understand how you're getting to that, but
Right.
Yeah.
There's probably a better way to say what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an evangelistic sermon, but I don't really care what you believe.
Yeah.
But it's not. That's the trick. It's not about what you believe. Oh wait, it is.
Oh man, it's funny. Okay, there's twice that you can assume. I don't know. So I think the issue was that you're dealing with like a big like meta issue, and I feel like you didn't like the meta issue of like sin and brokenness, and you didn't give like any specific ties to get us bought into like those concepts, you know. And so you definitely like talked about the concepts, about how they're wrong, you know, like the issues of them. But like there's like a few times when, so for instance, you said, if God was real, would you be right with him? I'm like, maybe. Like, I don't know.
Right.
You're assuming that I don't think I'm going to be right with God. And then another time you said, the problem is we all try to be God. And I'm like, I'm not trying to be God. I'm
Right.
just trying to pay the rent, you know, kind of thing. And so just like kind of how do you get that person who does think that they're right with God,
Yeah.
but has never really thought about it a whole lot, and also the person who is like, dude, I'm hardly even thinking about that because I'm just trying to make ends
Right.
meet. I'm just trying to be a good dad. Like,
Yeah.
seems like a good thing to me, you know. And so, yeah, just kind of assuming where we're all at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is ironic since we just did Billy Graham.
Oh Lord.
There was multiple occasions on which I was like, why are we here?
Mm.
Or why did that end there? It just kind of like
Mm.
tailed off. So like your whole cleaning your apartment illustration,
Yeah.
it was like as if you were like, and now I'm done with that and I'm gonna move to the next thing. Where I was like, wait. It's not that there was no payoff there, it was just like, how? What? Or you got into this like really, I thought it was fine when you said when you got there, about like, you did this kind of big picture gospel thing at the end. But I was like, why are we talking about this?
Mm.
What got us, maybe it was a line, but you definitely didn't like lead us there.
Mm.
It might have been like a short transition there, but it just kind of felt like, why are we doing this again?
Yeah.
I'm looking at the text, I'm just trying to figure out, where are you saying this stuff?
Yeah.
So I guess just more hand holding, this is what's hard about like having an outline,
Yeah.
is just, okay, it's not the big transitions
Right.
necessarily, but it's the little ones,
Yeah.
like moving from idea to idea.
So I think, and maybe you guys can help me with this. I think the first, like the setting and the whole John being like, I'm not the guy, that like makes a lot of sense to me. It kind of makes sense what's going on. I think what's tricky is like, I understand the third point where he's like, that's the guy. He's, come from heaven to bring life, or there's wrath if you don't believe him. I think what's tricky, well, I felt the tension there is like, there's a lot like around that he doesn't explain. And so like how to do that in a way that makes sense. In terms of like,
You're talking about the third point or the second point?
the third point, where he's talking about Jesus, where he's like, that's a guy.
Okay,
It's like,
okay.
I mean, what is sin exactly that we need it forgiven, and how does, like, it doesn't say like how he accomplishes any of this stuff. It's just like he's bringing life, and if you don't believe in him, like, there's wrath.
Yep.
So what are some good ways to, when that's all it kind of gives you?
Just explain way more simply.
Okay.
So the one thing would be sum up what he's saying.
Yeah.
So he, if it's, if it's just like, you need forgiveness of sin,
Yeah.
he can give you life.
Yeah.
Well,
But he doesn't say you need forgiveness of sin. That's the thing.
okay, so then don't say it.
Okay.
Stick with what he says.
Yeah.
Or draw out the implication, because what does he say?
He's coming. He's talking from God. Whoever believes in him has eternal life. Whoever doesn't obey him shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on him.
Okay, great. So all you gotta do is be like, so Jesus offers life.
Mm.
And you might be thinking, why is that such a big deal?
Mm.
Well, because according to this passage, what all of us currently have,
Mm.
apart from life in Jesus,
Mm.
is the wrath of God.
Mm.
So 2 ways of being in the world. Wrath of God or life in Jesus.
Mm.
Like, I don't even have to explain it. What do you think which one do you want?
Mm-hmm.
But I'll explain it. Because the question is, why is the wrath of God on us? And then just very briefly, don't go do some big biblical theology thing. Just go like, well, because you use the throne thing or whatever.
Yeah.
You try to do it. You just totally stole out of Chapman.
Oh,
right?
half this I was like,
Right.
oh, I'm
Oh,
just
yeah.
gonna use
Oh, yeah,
stuff.
you were-
I'm just gonna steal.
Yeah, it's good. You're trying it
Yeah.
out. So you just go like, well, the wrath of God is on all of us by nature because we, by nature, rebel against God.
Yeah.
We say, hey, God, I know that's your throne, but just scoot on over. I'm going to sit on it for a while.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the wrath of God. So you just keep coming back to that wrath of God.
Yeah.
Well, so how do we ever escape that?
Mm.
Well, it's through life in Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what John's saying. He's like, it's not me, it's that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that guy so great? Because there's life in him.
Mm-hmm.
So stick with the terms, keep repeating those terms, and just
Yeah.
play off of them way more simply. All the explanation you do is explain that thing right there,
That's helpful.
and it would have been clearer.
Yeah.
And don't let that term be thing.
Yeah, don't let that
Big
thing be
thing.
thing.
I think also what tripped me up, and I think I should just like forget about this, is like the way he talks is like really pretty circular. And
Yes.
It's like just forget that and make it clear.
Yes.
Instead of being like this line and then this line.
Yeah, no, don't
and
do
just
that.
be like, I basically what he's saying is
Yes.
Jesus is from heaven. He's bringing life. You know.
Right.
And it's like forget the rest of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. This is one of the tricky things about John. John's this very kind of like,
Yeah.
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 and you just gotta. It's really helpful in explaining things, but especially in evangelistic settings, you gotta cut through it and just be like, here's what he's saying.
Mm-hmm.
I think you gotta do that on Sundays too.
Yeah.
What's one thing that you're like, yeah, I tried, I'm stealing from Chapman, and I tried this, and I think it worked.
Well, I think the two, like, so from Chapman and Graham, the things I tried to do is like Billy Graham with just a question over and over again,
Yeah.
who's Jesus? So I tried to
Yeah.
do that. I didn't have like a main point, but I think basically it's like things are not right and Jesus is coming to make them right. So
Yeah.
I just tried to keep
Yeah.
asking like, hey, like how are things going to be made right? And then I think the like couple things with Chapman of like, yeah, the idea of sin of like we're on God's throne and and then I don't know, like clearly this didn't work, but Chapman's whole thing of like here's a story and then like here's the question to you, trying to do that with like hey, like I don't have the best idea of how clean things are, and then kind of trying to ask of like, hey, what if you actually didn't know what if you actually weren't as good as you thought? What if your life wasn't as clean as you thought? So I don't think it worked necessarily.
Right.
But-
So at the end, okay, yeah, we'll get there.
Trying to do some of those
All
things.
right.
I was gonna say the same thing about the questions that you kept asking throughout, and how not only the main question, how that was like repeated, which was really good, but then explaining it to people unfamiliar with the Bible, like who are these people,
Yeah.
and like what are they doing, and stuff like that, and who can actually do this, like whose authority is it? And
Yeah.
I really liked the questions, how that explained it to. I really connected to unbelievers a lot. I thought so.
Yeah, I thought the single man's okay with the lower standard of cleanliness was really good.
Yep.
But the thing that I have wrote down is, have you ever woke up and realized things aren't all right? And so it's just that things, and then the transition out of it. But I think, oh wait, sorry, pause it. But it was good. Like
Yeah.
that was definitely like, to me, the high point of the sermon was it was enough at first that I was like intrigued, and then I'm like, I totally see where he's going, and you just went right there. And
Did you feel like the transition out paid off
No.
enough? Okay. So how do I pay off more on that?
Okay. Look, let's think about this for a second.
Yeah.
So, because it really worked. I'm with Brian, 100%. You need to use this illustration again.
Yeah.
Why were you using it?
Because I'm trying to get people with me on, yeah, man, it's crazy how people can be living in a state that's not okay, that's unclean, that's not good, but they don't realize it.
Okay.
And then trying to help people see, like, hey, what if, because if I just tell you things are not right with your life, you're going to be like, nah. But if I can explain how sometimes things can be not right, but we don't see it, and then I can kind of ask, like, hey, what if the way your like morality and your whole life is kind of like that?
Okay.
I know I didn't explain it super well, but
You're fine, but you essentially set up the punchline, but you haven't, or set up the joke, but you haven't told the punchline. You have to say, that's what Jesus does. Jesus is demonstrating
right, that things are not clean.
that, yeah,
Yeah.
that you didn't, that didn't come, that needs to come like there. So the illustration's really good, but it's where you kind of use the illustration, I think, in your sermon. Because it was just like, oh, all right, what if you realized that?
Yeah.
I don't know. Or you could say, like, that's why they're getting baptized.
Well, so that was my thing. Is I wanted, I guess I wanted it to make the listener feel a little bit uncomfortable about like, oh, maybe my life is not as good as I think it is.
Right.
And then try to turn it to, hey, if you were in that situation, wouldn't you want to go find someone who would make it better?
Yes. Okay. Good.
So I think, yeah, and then the next thing I have written down after is run to the person that can make things right. I think
Right.
you went to that too soon.
Okay.
Maybe. Or I would have said something more like keep running this thing, and then being like, have you ever woke up and realized that things aren't all right? And then you like keep amping up a little bit of like, man, have you ever just like thought, oh, I'm gonna get to that later, I'm gonna get to that later,
Right.
and then you realize one day that you have a massive problem on your hand
Yeah.
that no longer you can handle,
Right.
and you don't know what to do. You can't handle it. You've got to bring in outside help.
Yeah.
And that to me is where you bring in.
Because but then you need to go like, that's who Jesus is,
Yeah.
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 and it didn't pay off.
Yeah.
It was just like, okay, run to the one. Well, who's that? And then
Right.
you went
And then, like-
let me tell you who it's not.
10 minutes later, yeah, and then it's like, okay, where's Jesus? Yeah. Yeah. And I think the question can't be like, what if you woke up? But it's got to be like, what if your life is like that? Like you think you're all right, but actually, like stuff is way messier.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so one of the things I thought was good about this is that from the very beginning to the end, there was definitely like a lot at stake in this sermon.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was clear that from the introduction all the way to the end, like, okay, things aren't made right. Could they ever be made right? You think this Jesus guy makes things right. And we definitely need them to be made right. So it was like, okay, well, at least I'm intrigued on what your answer is,
Yeah.
Josh.
Just expanding on, you explained a lot about ways that things can't be right. Like looking to politicians, looking for self-help. And then John's attitude in that, it's like, it's not me. And like his good example almost that he brought out, and also celebrities, like what celebrities do to make it better. I don't know, I just like the way you explained all the different areas of trying to make it right, trying to wrestle with this. It's like, I can't find it. So, I don't know, yeah, I really like that.
So I thought in your second point you did a really good job making simple a complicated part of the text, and the way that you said that like through a statement they ask the question of like which baptism was right, and I just thought that was a really good, clear explanation and kind of pretty efficient use of like explanation to get on off of it. So
Yeah, I do think that your Graham-like repetition of the question, like, how could things ever be made right, both in the introduction and throughout the sermon, because you're right, you did have a main point, but it didn't suffer from a main point because it was clear that like this sermon was answering that question, and
Right.
the answer to that question that you had was also very succinct, and so that held the whole thing together.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what the text is doing. Is it's like, man, Jesus is the one. He's the one, man.
Yeah.
I ain't the one. He's the one.
Yeah.
So it was effective in that even though there were some very distracting things as you went along, it was at least it was saved by the fact that it was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's what we're trying to answer here.
Yeah. I tried to do the little like have another person do that too.
You tried.
Yeah, I mean, I was
We're
like,
all
oh.
working on it.